P.J. O'Rourke made his reputation as the Republican scourge of the woolly-minded liberals. He said a lot of things that the soft left needed to hear, and then on September the 11th, 2001, a hard rain fell in New York. The following week, P.J. was in London.
P.J., the only thing I know about what we're about to do is it's not going to be like what it would have been about 2 weeks ago.
Yes, the world hasn't changed. We've heard a lot of the world has changed. The world was there was a lot of evil in the world. There's still a lot of evil in the world, but our way of looking at the world may have changed a little bit. Of course, a lot of people's lives have changed in the most disastrous sort of way.
All this stuff is already in your books. I was just thinking about it today, just how serious your books are underneath. They really are about poverty, starvation, the world's problems. It's not that you're funny about that. You're really funny about people's attitudes towards it and the agonies that intellectuals put themselves through, about America's role in the world. And that whole question has now become very acute.
There are an enormous number of people who are at least notionally Muslim in the world, ranging from the depths of the Philippines to the 7-Eleven in my neighborhood. And I suppose, assuming that this terrorism is being conducted on the theory of previous terrorisms, that part of the idea is to galvanize them into an us and them sort of thing, so that they feel that they are on a particular side in some sort of holy war against the other side, which would be us. They aren't, of course. The great majority of Muslims in the world are Muslim like I'm a Methodist. And this is not to say that I'm not a religious person. I mean, it's just that I'm not looking to establish a fundamentalist Methodist state.
You don't want to kill people who are not Methodists, like me, for example. No. I'm a Presbyterian. You don't want to kill me.
No. In fact, I really have to sort of think about it pretty hard to remember what it is that sets us apart. Oh, predestinarian. You're a predestinarian. We're free will. Our hymns are better.
Well, this is exactly the point. But when you expand it, you realize that what we call the ordinary Muslims, the moderate Muslims, they are the pigs in the middle. They're going to get squeezed.
Oh, they are. I don't think pig was the word you wanted to choose. Being culturally sensitive as we are. Yes, I mean, they're in a terrific bind. They're in the situation. Well, I mean, we say, oh, I don't understand any of this. How can people be suicide bombers and stuff? But we have them ourselves. I'm Irish. I understand this sort of thing. This is, if we go back, say, to Easter Rebellion time, the regular people who are Muslim are in the position of the ordinary Irish, caught in the middle between a group that was fanatical and a group against whom they had some valid complaints.
It does present a tremendous problem, doesn't it, to the emerging, or we hope it's emerging, secular Muslim intelligentsia.
Tremendous problem to the emerging secular, cosmopolitan, comfy, middle-class world that I think that we would all like to live in.
And many of them, of course, have been exported into the West. So they have a problem. And then throughout the Muslim lands, these countries are developing what we recognize as I wouldn't say a skeptical way of life, but a balanced way of life between belief and behavior. They're going to be put on the spot in a big way, and that's one of the things that terrorism must be out to do.
It is, and that's why our response to it has to be, now we're not going to be able to avoid that entirely, because anything we do is going to cause a certain amount of that. But if we were to do something just, well, Clinton-esque, really. I mean, Clinton's response to something like this would be to cry copious tears, which he probably would feel at the moment that he was crying them, and then lob a few cruise missiles, blow up an aspirin factory in Khartoum, and declare victory and move on to his next girlfriend or whatever. And
Bush isn't like that, huh?
Well, we don't know. We'll see. I mean, so far he hasn't been. There was tremendous political pressure in the United States, and I'm sure there's some political pressure in Europe too, to do something dramatic to show that we have resolve, that we're not going to let this sort of thing slide, that there is some sort of international. And he has resisted doing something precipitate at any rate. Now, when he does do something, will it be the right thing? We shall see.
He gets a kind of comic press here, even in right-leaning newspapers as a sort of inarticulate text and so on. He's always struck me as a little bit brighter than that. For one thing, he's president of the United States, which is not that easy to do. You have to beat Al Gore.
No, especially when you had to get it by such a complicated method. I think that he and his showed themselves to be quite clever in Florida, at any rate, if not on the campaign trail. Although that was an amazing American political campaign, even by American campaign standards. Bush lost Michigan. Now, Michigan is, of course, where Detroit is. How stupid do you have to be to lose Michigan to a man, Al Gore, who hates cars? I mean, you go to Michigan, you hold up Earth in the balance, and you say, man hates cars, wrote it in a book. I mean, that's all there is to it. On the other hand, how bad, how stupid do you have to be the sitting vice president in a very popular administration during an enormous economic boom, not a cloud on the horizon, or very few at that time during the election, and you can't manage a decisive win over this tongue-bungled, Texan...
who is suddenly emerging as more eloquent than we thought, but I think we are at liberty to suppose that his speechwriters are improving.
First couple of responses that Bush made to this were not very good. They had those rounded phrases, those tropes. You can shake the foundation of the World Trade Center, but you cannot shake the foundation of America, which I thought in the circumstance was, I would have preferred inarticulate rage.
Just rhetoric.
And we know he can do half of that, so I mean, he was halfway there. But by the time he was in New York talking to the rescue workers, he was speaking like himself. I'm sure he had a little bit of assistance. You don't become president without getting that. But I mean, he was speaking in a much more sort of regular person way. And I've always felt that George is not a great speechmaker, but he was terrific when he addressed Congress when Blair was there. And he's been very good. And I think Americans look at him and they say, gee, when I have to get up to speak at Rotary, that's kind of what I sound like. I mean, I think Americans are sympathetic to the fact that he's not a glib.
There does seem to be such a hunger for the leader principle, not just in the U.S., but across the world with relation to the U.S. For example, Mayor Ralph Giuliani is practically getting drafted as a new president.
Yes, he is indeed, yeah. And Giuliani's a very interesting case of a flawed man, obviously flawed man, with some very strong sides to him.
Did I call him Ralph? What's his first name?
Rudolph.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a very difficult man. Ask his first wife. And
the women are one of the flaws, right?
Yes, I think so. And I know people. My father-in-law is a retired FBI agent, and he was in the FBI when Giuliani was a prosecutor. And the opinion of the people that worked with him was that he was a bit of a glory hound, that he was a bit of an attention hog, that he was a bit of a martinet, and so on. But New York, of course, is a very chaotic city. Needs a bit of that, maybe. And when the chips were down, and perhaps, again, no better choice of phrase than your pig, but anyway, when things were bad, he really came through, and that's what you want. I think it's natural for there to be a desire for leadership in this kind of situation because, frankly, a lot of the things that will have to be done in this situation will have to be done sort of privately.
I think that's why there's a certain satisfaction that Colin Powell is there, because you do think that no matter how gung-ho the president and the people around him get, Colin Powell is the voice of moderation, because Colin Powell is the man who did not invade Iraq.
Which may not have been the right decision.
I tend to agree that it
but I'll tell you, I was on the Mutlah Ridge. I was covering all that. I was out there, and I was on the Mutlah Ridge a day after the slaughter of Iraqi troops up there, and the bodies are still around and so on. And I was sickened. And I at that time, I supported stopping the war when it was turning into a slaughter, and I supported stopping it. Hindsight is 20/20, of course, and we maybe shouldn't have done that. But there's Powell, but he's also balanced by, I think there's a European idea that Bush is very gung-ho. We don't really know that. I mean, his father was a man of calm and calculation.
Great coalition builder.
Great coalition builder.
Great on the phones.
Worked very patiently in the run-up to the Gulf War. I think that people hear that Texan accent, and and read. I mean, after all, this is a Bush and a Yaley, and I mean,
it's a gift to what you would describe as, I think, as the liberal view of America's role in the world. That the president should sound as if he should be wearing a 10-gallon hat. I've just been in Australia, and the Australian intelligentsia and the media as a whole behave roughly the way...
Did you just use the phrase Australian intelligentsia?
There is an Australian intelligentsia. I know the guy very well. I know the Australian intelligentsia well. I have a drink with him every time I'm there. I'll have no mockery from you on this one, PJ.
Sorry, I'm from Ohio. Well known.
Australia is practically staffed with intelligentsia. That's what Australia really has got. And there is more than one of them, and the British equivalent are united in this view of America's role in the world. And if you've been following the press here, this is the first thing that comes up to question. Some would say with indecent haste after the events. America was practically being blamed for it. What
certainly in the New Statesman, who's...
well, that's not... It hasn't got a wide circulation.
Well, and deservedly so. And still, if I find the person who wrote that leader...
I think that was just plain foolish. But The Guardian has a much more civilized view of that, and yet that's the tendency.
I think it's important to understand that America's role is... it's large part accidental. I mean, we are not the Roman Empire that conquered a bunch of the world, or, for that matter, the British Empire that conquered a bunch of the world. I mean, we did conquer a big slice of our continent, but it was a long time ago, long, long before we became rich or powerful or a player on the international scene. America kind of stumbled into being the richest and most powerful country in the world, never intending to particularly. Our secret has been a large, diverse population of free people, an economic system that's been very effective, a large internal market, a number of things like that. And we just wound up when all the other players had sat down, we were still standing. It's not like something we set out to do. That said, we cannot pretend that we're Belgium. I wrote a piece for the... about 3 or 4 weeks ago for the Wall Street Journal about American unilateralism. And I said, you put us in the boat with various other countries. It's like putting Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock or one of these, giant professional wrestlers in the boat with Callisto Flockhart, and then George Stephanopoulos. And it's not going to make for a balanced crew team.
You could have said that without America there wouldn't have been a Belgium.
Well, I could have, but I didn't.
Well,
I didn't give in to temptation.
I'll say it for you because I have a very clear-cut view on it. America simply saved civilization in World War II.
And we came a little late.
You came in late.
We were reluctant.
That was one of the first. That was one of the first things that anybody writing in our press mentioned after they said America saved civilization. Of course, they came in a very little late after they made a profit. My own view is that America saved civilization, and that's that, and our debt is eternal. But that, of course, is where the resentment begins, because nobody loves the person who saves them. Right?
No. I mean, the best way to destroy a friendship is to do a big and unreturnable favor to a friend. Loan money, a large amount of money. That usually does it. And my course question to Europe is, are you going to take as long piddling around to get behind the problem we've got now as we took to get behind the problem you had during World War I? Is it going to be 1918 before you're absolutely in gear, not to back us up, because it's not an American thing. It's not called the World Trade Center for nothing. Largest terrorist disaster to British
I'm bound to say I don't think the terrorists are infallible. I think that's where they made the mistake. If they were attacking America, they should have attacked America. It wasn't wise to attack an international event, was it?
Yes, I mean
they built their coalition right there.
Yeah, they did in a way. I mean, I don't think they knew any more than I knew the extent of the international nature of the.
Because they don't really understand capitalism.
No, of course,
which is an economic system. It's not a.
There's
not a church.
Very strange. You're dealing with people here who have a spotty sort of sophistication. They're not unsophisticated, but the sophistication is patchy. And there are whole areas. For instance, there was a statement, I can't remember if it was Ozma himself or one of his ilk, something about America is not strong enough to attack. Well, they said today America is not strong enough to attack Afghanistan. It may not be a good idea to attack Afghanistan, but I swear we are strong enough to attack Afghanistan. But he said, America will not defeat us. The United States will not defeat us. They will no longer be the United States. They will be different states who are bringing home their dead. And so I mean, you can see right there that they've taken the very name of the United States, like literally, in a way that hasn't been appropriate since well before the Civil War.
America, at the end of World War II, actually tried again to retire within itself. The truth about America after World War II, America after World War II practically disarmed. The 3 or 4 atomic bombs are in existence. There were no planes to deliver them. They would, if they could, have gone home. There's a tendency to go home. It's called isolationism.
Yes,
it's one of the things, the reason America was late in the war. It's a very Republican tendency in a way. And what I want to ask
was. I'm not sure it is anymore.
Well, I actually can imagine you storming ashore on D-Day quite easily. O'Rourke in the lead. In fact, I can imagine it more easily than I can imagine Tom Hanks doing it.
Well, nice of you to say, although I'm one of those sort of incompetent people that maybe I would have, but I wouldn't have gotten very far. The Germans. I'm slow. The Germans would have gotten me.
A lot of people didn't get very far on Omaha Beach. I can imagine you doing that, but would you, say, in 40 and 41, have been an isolationist?
I hope I wouldn't, and I say that in part because I am a board member of an organization called Freedom House that was founded just then. We just had our anniversary, and it was founded by Wendell Willkie, then America's most prominent Republican, and of all people, Eleanor Roosevelt, a very odd political bedfellows. But it was founded for the purpose of convincing America not to be isolationist. And their argument was, and our argument at Freedom House remains, that America has no choice. Given the size that we are, given the economic size that we are, given the role that we play, will we, nil we, in the world, that what we do causes international effect. Whether we want to be isolationist or not, we might as well face up to the fact, deal with it, and get our policy going accordingly.
I don't really buy the idea that the terrorists, if there is such a single group, are reacting to American foreign policy in the Middle East. I don't think Osama bin Laden cares a damn about Israelis and Palestinians.
That is, of course, all very complicated. And I mean, the fact that there's been a flashpoint in the Middle East for so long distracts us from a larger problem. And I think that really what Osama bin Laden and his ilk and other Islamicists are most worried about is the growth of a prosperous, middle-class, democratic, secular, cosmopolitan world all over the world, including the Muslim world. This threatens their idea of society. This threatens their absolute reliance on religious orthodoxy. They are very, very frightened of this, and quite rightly, they think the largest target in this change in the world is the United States. We didn't cause this change in the world, but we are the largest example of it, and we are part of the engine, a very large part of the engine that makes it go. But our situation is very like the situation of Britain in the 19th century. Anything that happened in the world was blamed on Britain. And if you go out back in India, or you go out back in Pakistan, or you go out back in parts of former British Africa, you will get the locals to tell you that whatever disaster, the drought, the goats dying, whatever it is, it was the British. Or maybe it will be a conspiracy of the British and the Jews.
You don't have to go very far out back in Australia to hear the same argument now.
No kidding. Or Ireland, for that matter. Yeah. So there are places around the globe that haven't quite gotten up to speed to blame everything on America. And someday, doubtless, it'll be the EU, or perhaps Singapore, or who knows.
In your latest book, it's not just you being the chief executive officer on the sofa. There's this little presence down there on the floor.
A couple of them.
Yeah. the godchildren. It's a book about what to tell the kids. And I've often thought the same as the years go by. What sort of world are our children moving into? And I hope it's this. I think we both want the same world, and it's got a lot to do with the separation of the state from religion. In other words, theocracy and democracy are not compatible.
And part of the problem, if we're going to talk frankly about the problems that we're facing in the Islamic world, as a religion, Islam does not have, at least so far, the germ of that separation between church and state.
This is a dynamite subject, and I'm trepidatious even moving
a lot of trouble about this.
But let's get into trouble, because I think exactly the same. I think the focus of the whole business is that Islam has not developed a secular intelligentsia. There was a chance of it in the 19th century when the Quran was starting to be examined in a scholarly fashion. That was stopped. And that's the biggest problem that Islam faces.
As far as I know,
the women especially.
Well, that of course is another very big problem. You cannot move into the modern world without women. If you try and move into the modern world without taking your wife along, you get in trouble. I speak with authority on this. I don't speak with authority on the Quran, of course, but as far as I know, there is no equivalent to Christ's statement to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's.
There is certainly no equivalent to his statement that let you among you who is without sin cast the first stone. Sharia law says that if 4 people catch you in adultery, you can be stoned. That's a very different thing.
4?
That's strict Sharia law. And
really? I've only been ever caught by 1.
But
lets me out.
There is no equivalent to Jesus' figure saying, well, if you catch her, 4 of you catch her, then you can stone.
Now, this problem is not by any means limited to Islam. It was a long time in Western society before the idea, if not the fact, of theocracy was abandoned.
It was a long time before religion ceased to be lethal, and it was when religion was united with the state.
Yes, indeed it was. And with Orthodox Judaism, I spent Passover and Easter to me in Israel. There was fury in Israel. A lot of the Israelis I talked to were very mad, and they weren't mad at the Palestinians. They were mad at Orthodox Jews. There's tremendous division in that country. And the Orthodox Jews, of course, some of them at any rate, would like a theocracy. So this is not a problem that's limited.
The whole idea of Eretz Israel is a menace, in fact. It's because that's the artificial extension of land
and it's a menace to the secular, cosmopolitan Israelis, the Israelis who represent our point of view on what a free society and a democratic society ought to be.
You've been there several times without getting your ass blown off.
I have, I'm glad to say.
And you've been many, many places, hot spots in the world without getting your ass blown off. But,
touch wood.
But what's coming up next may increase the chance of getting your ass blown off by exponential.
A couple of adorable little kids at home.
Exactly. That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, which is pouring a little bit of cold water on my desire to see.
What are your responsibilities now? Is the question.
Yes, the interior of Afghanistan and I are probably not going to be in close proximity soon. I hope. This doesn't mean I'm going to stop going to. I had talked earlier about my father-in-law being a retired FBI agent, and it's very nice to be married to a woman whose father came home when she was a child every day, put his pistol on top of the dresser, said, "Don't touch that," and she doesn't regard what I do as terrifically dangerous any more than she regarded what her dad did as terrifically dangerous. Of course, most of the time it's not. But it is kind of a funny perspective. Everybody else being seen off to Britain was warning their loved one about terrorist hijackings of airplanes, and my wife was warning me about eating beef on the bone.
Where did you fly the Atlantic? Was it last week?
It was Sunday night, Monday. I just got
on an almost empty plane, I imagine. Right?
About half empty it was, or maybe even a little more than half. And a BA, I'm glad to say, I'm very loyal to.
Well, it speaks well for you because when the Gulf War broke out, Sylvester Stallone, of all people, did not go to the Cannes Film Festival.
I remember, I'd forgotten
that was Rambo. Rambo didn't show.
Rambo didn't show up. Yeah, well, okay.
There he was, grenades on his lapel, but he didn't go. Hell no, I won't go.
I was.
But you came. You actually.
Well, this is not very dangerous. I think that if they are going to have a second strike, they'll figure out something else. There'll be very much a hit them where they ain't sort of thing.
I'm a big fan of there's a website magazine which I'm sure you know called The Onion, which I think
very
is
good.
A brilliant construction.
Very good.
And it went silent last week.
And rightly so.
Yeah.
Rightly so. As a professional humorist of 30 years or so, standing, humor is an important tool. It's an important tool of social criticism. It's an important psychological release. It's vital to civilization. But like any tool, it has its time and its place, and you wouldn't want to repair your watch with a hammer. And there are times when the humorist should shut up. This is probably one of them. But at any rate, I'm not cracking wise.
No. There is a way of speaking of serious matters lightly, and I think even in these circumstances we can do that. But it has changed the tone, and America is now looking again at something that almost tore the country apart during the time of the Vietnam War, which is the boys going overseas to get shot at. And
I think this is a very different America. This is a very different America from the America of Vietnam.
Different war.
It's a very different war, of course, and the nature of this war is going to be very different. It's going to be fought by professional people who are very devoted to what they're doing, for one thing. For another thing, America was a very much more of an elitist country at the time that we got into Vietnam. Vietnam was the idea of some brainiacs, and all gone to Harvard and Yale, hung around with no one but each other and had lots of chats with each other inside Washington and never really consulted.
The East Coast foreign policy elite, I believe they call themselves.
Yes, they were, and that's gone. The Americans traditionally did not politically pay any attention to foreign policy, left that in the hands of the elites. Because Americans, either were foreigners or didn't know where foreign countries were, sometimes both, Nowadays, America is a much more outward-looking country. Foreign policy is very much on the table as part of the general political debate. Nothing is going to happen in the United States without an informed consent of the American people. American people did the American people did consent to our involvement in Vietnam initially, but you cannot very well call it an informed consent. We knew very little about the country, the political situation, even the geography of it, and I think that can be said about several other of our involvements. But this is not any longer true. Americans are pretty well informed about this kind of thing.
PJ, it's been fascinating. I shouldn't say it's a pleasure in these circumstances, but even in these circumstances, it's a pleasure to talk to someone with a mind so clear, so sharp, and so committed was the word we used to use. Committed.
Yes.
PJ O'Rourke, committed.